Hi, and good afternoon to everyone. This is Nick Mandonis. I'm Senior Director of Customer Success at LinkSquares. Thank you so much for joining our session today. We're going to kick it off in about 2 minutes. So thank you for your time. Okay, thank you so much. Welcome to LinkSquares Elevate. I'm kicking off our session today. Again, my name is Nick Mandonis. I'm the Senior Director of Customer Success here at LinkSquares. I've had the opportunity of being at this organization for 3 years. Prior to that, was a customer myself, and I'll be introducing Sean, who's also on our panel today. One of our customers will be speaking in our session, Legal Metrics That Matter. We'll do a proper introduction. In terms of the webinar today, there's a few different sections that you'll be able to join in. Keep in mind that each section has its own webinar link, so just be mindful of that. Today at 1 o'clock, we'll be doing the legal metrics that matter, tracking success. Following thereafter, unlocking the power of generative AI in the LinkSquares cloud. Thoroughly recommend that session. At 2:45, we'll kick off with contract negotiation, closing the quarter strong. And then finally, we'll do some virtual network breakout sessions. In the agenda, you've seen the different options that are presented to you. Please choose the one that you think is the most relevant for your interests and expertise. We're really excited for today's session. And then, Dart, about all these sessions that you're going to be listening to, just be mindful that you can always send a question through the chat interface. We're monitoring those as you submit your questions, and we'll make sure that we answer those as quickly as possible, and especially if it's relevant to the conversation, as quickly as we can get to it. So thank you very much, and we appreciate the interactiveness as we go through the webinar today. So I'll kick off first with a few slides here just to talk a little bit about metrics, high level. And from my perspective, we really think about metrics and why it's important to pay attention to them. Because as an industry and as a business, it is so important to think about what matters in terms of how you're trying to run your business. And when you think about the reality of our circumstances is that when we're looking to purchase, especially today in a market that's quite intense and very strict in terms of budget and approvals, we find that you're getting scrutinized quite a bit from CFOs or other executive sponsors, and are asking you when you're looking to purchase something or defend something that you're leveraging, what is that demonstrable or demonstrable ROI that you're really looking to solve for the organization? And there's just a reality that if you can't improve what you don't measure, how do you really know if you're actually doing anything that's valuable? And from our perspective, the data is kind of showing that, unfortunately, that sometimes we do lose sight of this kind of demonstrable ROI that we really sought out for. And what happens is that, unfortunately, 30 to 60% of software that organizations purchase ultimately can become shelfware, which means that they're just not actually being leveraged or used. And we also recognize that software costs much more than just licenses. There's time involved in getting a product up and running. There's efforts that you need to do with your own reputation that comes into play. And there's also the change management side of that, which is creating either new process, training new folks, and getting that vision buy-in across your organization. So for that, it stands to reason, if we're going to put a lot of effort into something, if we see that it's going to be valuable, well, then we should really try to make sure it works. And from that perspective, how do we feel and find that that's successful? Well, frankly, it's really by measuring and understanding the impact that your potential product of choice will be able to do for you. And just having that outcome, even if it's not something that you necessarily know you're hitting or not, if you have a measurable impact that you want to hit, you're likely to keep your product for 3 times longer if you even have something to measure against. And if you do actually measure and have success to it, we're seeing that you can actually have 9 times more longer than having the product than if you never did that before. So obviously results matter, metrics matter, and measuring matters, because that's the best type of answer you can get to a question when they say, why is product X relevant to our organization? And we need a better answer than, I feel like it's doing X for me. We really need to have the numbers. They're extremely important. And if you look at the paradigm with CFOs and where they think about their business and how they orchestrate their minds, they're ultimately the budget keepers for most of the things that organizations buy. And so for that, they really think of things in 3 lenses. How is this going to reduce risk for our organization? How will this increase our revenue, make us faster? Or how are we going to reduce costs and make us more efficient in our day-to-day processes? If you can do 1, 2, or ideally even 3 on this paradigm, then there's a lot of metrics that you can start to think about and a lot of outcomes that you can start to realize from your product. Here's a statement from one of our customers, and I think is a very helpful one to kind of showcase an example of where LinkSquares could be of value, but just in general, where and how they think about this. Farouk is a CFO at a company called Softonic, and his quote down here, I think, really resonates. Having our team and our external counsel operating and finalize has been very helpful, particularly as they're scattered across different cities as well. We've even managed to reduce external legal costs by 40%. It's that last piece that we really want to hang our hat to, right? So what that allows him to do, how he's able to justify that, think about that for every purchase that you make. How could I justify a significant savings, reduction of risk, or significant efficiencies that you're able to get from any product that you purchase, and why that makes a difference, not only for the organization, but for you and your reputation as well. At this time, I'd love to welcome Sean Hoyt, Vice President, Commercial at OutSystems. I have an opportunity to work with him, and he has some really great insight that he uses internally in his organization. And here in the next 30 minutes or so, he's going to walk us through just a few of the ways that he showcases metrics to his business. And from my perspective, having been able to spend some time with Sean over the past 24 months, as he's worked as a customer with us, I've come to know him as a very methodical operator, a thoughtful leader who really pays attention to the details. And to this end, I thought it'd be prudent to have him take us through what he thinks about solving some of these issues when we think of metrics that matter. So thank you, Sean, for joining us today.
Great. Thank you, Nick, for the kind introduction. I appreciate that. It's great to be here with everyone. So, my role, as you can see, is I run the commercial portion of the legal team at OutSystems. And what that means is that we're responsible for all of the contracting that we do with customers, with partners, and with suppliers. I'm not on the corporate side of the fence. It's all about, getting new parties into the company and getting them to renew and keeping high rates of retention and expanding the business. OutSystems as a company was founded in Portugal, and we've over 20 years ago, and we've got a very large global footprint. We have customers in over 80 countries, and we have over 2,000 customers, over 2,000 partners, and over 2,000 suppliers. So what that means for our team is that we have a very complex level of scale and a very complex level of reach in terms of kind of the global footprint. And because of that, it became really important to start to be able to measure everything that was happening. And so my journey at OutSystems with metrics started fairly quickly when I joined in 2022 and realized was we needed to be able to start reporting on how we were doing across all of these three key areas. And for us, you can imagine with that level of scale, one of our key success metrics became scalability. So if we've got over 2,000 customers now and we aspire to have many, many more customers, many, many more partners, probably less suppliers, but
Mhm.
if that's our aspirations, then we need to be able to measure how we're doing and how are we progressing towards that goal and are we doing it efficiently? And so our metrics journey was really driven largely around showing that we were able to be efficient about what we're doing. But Nick, let's go on and look at the different types of metrics because efficiency metrics are one of the types, but there's at least four and likely more categories of metrics that I encourage everyone to think about. The first one that a lot of people start with is volume metrics. So if you have a CLM, well, great, you should already have those, out of the box. But if not, you can still find ways to measure them. And this is just measuring what's the volume of work that you're doing. How many NDAs are you reviewing a quarter? How many, sales agreements do you have every quarter? Um, what's the volume of agreements that are pending in with our review? What are the number that are pending with the counterparty's review? And which categories are trending? Are we seeing many more people requesting, a lease agreement and many less customers, looking for purchase agreements? You can, depending on what the nature of your business is, you can look at what the trends are. And you can also use those volume metrics to look at your capacity. So if ideally you are processing, let's say, 40 MSAs per quarter, per lawyer, what happens if all of a sudden your metrics show you that you're doing 50 per lawyer per quarter? That's a very compelling basis on which to be able to go forward to your CFO or your HR team and say, hey, I think we need to look at the staffing on the legal team. So metrics can be volume metrics and capacity metrics can be a great way to level set the level of resources on your team and show that you're using those resources efficiently. Now, when it comes to efficiency metrics, which is the next category, and this is where I spend a lot of my time, is looking at basically how efficiently are we processing the work? Not how much work are we processing, but are we doing that work in an efficient manner? For example, how many agreements are we able to complete straight through, like in a purely automated manner? If there are manual steps, how many on average? If you have approval tasks, well, how many escalations are you having to do per contract? If you're doing escalations, where are they getting stuck? For example, are the ones that go to security going quickly, but the ones that go to product going slowly? And you can show where the bottlenecks are happening and then be able to attack those bottlenecks from an efficiency perspective. Now, the next category is speed. So you know how many, how much volume you're doing, but how fast are you doing it? So for example, with us, our most strategic agreement is the master subscription agreement. It's the one that governs the licenses to our software. And so there we want to be able to show that we're processing those MSAs as quickly as possible. Is it taking us on average, 15 days to process an MSA? Is it taking us 30? Is it taking us 45? Those numbers directly translate into the length of the sales cycle. And you also want to be able to show, okay, how does it differ between when we're working on our paper or we're working on a customer's paper? You might want to show how it differs depending on the size of the deal. Do the small ones take a lot less time than the big ones? You might look at it by geography or by industry. For example, your government contracts might take a lot longer than your ones in other sectors. But until you can measure that speed and be able to look at your velocity, it's kind of hard to be able to assess how you're doing. Now, one of the things I recommend on speed metrics for people is try to find a way to translate speed into dollars. So if you're working in a sales-driven organization, for example, if you could cut 15 days out of your MSA negotiation cycle, what would that translate to in terms of the improvement in revenue for the quarter? You can work with your CFO, work with your FP&A team, but to the extent you can show that by reducing the number of days, then you also increase the speed to revenue. That's when you really get the attention of your CFO your head of sales, when you can show that you are influencing the velocity of revenue at your company using speed metrics. Now, another one, not to be overlooked, because obviously you want to do a lot of deals and you want to get them done quickly and you want to get them done efficiently, but they should also be quality deals. You should be doing contracts that protect your company and that provide a level of compliance with your internal policies and procedures. So compliance metrics can be really important here. You can also call them risk metrics because they can measure how much risk are we taking on as a company. So for example, at OutSystems, we measure in our most important deals, which are the master subscription agreements, how often are we escalating beyond our standard positions or the positions that are captured in our approved fallbacks. And where we're escalating a lot, we want to look into that and say, why? What's happening? Are the market dynamics changing? Are competitors offering more? Why are we escalating more here? Why are we taking on more risk? And what does that mean for the company? Does it mean, for example, that we should buy more insurance? That might be an outcome of looking at your compliance metrics. One metric that's not listed here that I actually learned from LinkSquares, from their legal team, so shout out to the LinkSquares legal team, is what I would call an impact metric, which is to be able to show for what the legal team is doing, how is it impacting the revenue of the company? And I remember hearing from the LinkSquares team that they've been able to tie the agreements that they work on to the ARR that comes from those agreements. So in their system, they're able to link, we worked on this subset of these agreements. Those agreements came with X amount of ARR, and therefore we can show that the legal team is helping to deliver, X percent of the company's overall ARR. And with imitation being the most sincere form of flattery, Nick, I can tell you and your team that we're actually looking to copy
Fantastic.
that approach and figure out how we can automate that here at OutSystems.
Yeah,
But
it's a
let,
fantastic metric, Sean. I'll just quickly interject.
yeah,
We do have an opportunity in our QBRs that we do internally to go through those metrics. The legal team's able to share that, and on a month-to-month basis, we generally have a pretty good standing of where we're going to be as an organization based on the metrics that they track.
yeah, it's a really creative and innovative approach. I applaud your team on that. Let me just stop and see, Nick, is there any questions that have come in so far about kind of these categories?
No, I think, the generalist question that I think I see here is in regards to the metrics that you have and what was the most important one for you in your day to day. You talked a little bit about the efficiency metric being important for you, but was there a way that you were able to get started in efficiency to understand what was going to help you improve?
Well, in terms of where to get started, I think the best advice that I have for people is to start with your company's strategy. Start top down. Um, what are the levers that are most important to the business? And at OutSystems, after I kind of got in and really understood what the company's strategic objectives were, I realized that one of the most important things that we were trying to do was to get our software in the hand of more customers, grow our customer base. The product works fantastically well. Once customers start to use it, they buy more of it. And so it was really just key to expand the overall size of our customer base and, of course, retain the ones that we have. So it quickly pointed to the fact that we needed to look at the bringing in new customers and how could we legal align to that strategic objective of expanding our customer base. And the first thing that we realized is, okay, customers can join OutSystems in multiple ways contractually. They can go the traditional route of negotiating an MSA with us, either using our paper or their paper. But increasingly, we were trying to get customers to adopt our online MSA as a reference in the quote. So there was no negotiation required. And so we started to say, okay, let's look at that metric. What are the percentage of new logos who are adopting our online MSA? Because if they adopt our online MSA, we save on average more than 45 days out of the sales cycle. So the more we can influence that number, that's the single best way we can accelerate the sales cycle is by increasing the level of adoption of our online MSA, which actually leads me into the next couple of slides. I'll show some
Yeah,
examples, Nick, if you want to take me there.
will do.
So this metric, which actually comes from Salesforce, is an automated metric across our entire customer profile of what MSA type customers have adopted. And the largest bar here, the one that's kind of the darker blue, is the amount of customers who've adopted our online MSA. This number's up over 70%, pushing 75, as you can just tell. So that has a dramatic impact on our scalability. If 3/4 of our new logos don't need to negotiate an MSA, well, then we can scale this business and bring on new customers much faster. We're also proud of the fact that when a customer does want to negotiate an MSA, they only require that they work off of their paper less than 10% of the time. That's the purple bar there. We've done a ton of work to make our MSA customer friendly. And we've even gotten independent validation from a firm called TermScout that provides independent rankings on this. And so we're able to show customers that, hey, like it's going to move pretty fast if you work off of our MSA because we've made it really middle of the road and anticipated most of the objections that you have. But without metrics, how do you know that you're succeeding? Let's say we did all of that work, but we couldn't measure whether it was actually moving in the right direction. So if you go on to the next slide, it starts to show you the direction here. So the yellow line is the percentage of customers, new logos by quarter, who are adopting the online MSA. And if you look at the beginning of 2022, it was just a little over 75%. Now it's in the 90s. So we've really, really it's like a 20% improvement in that number. And 20% when you're talking about thousands of customers has a dramatic impact on the scalability of the company. So all this data comes from LinkSquares, by the way. We just downloaded it into a reporting tool and generated this graph. But this data is all coming from systems versus being something that we calculate manually. And if you go into the next slide, we've gone further and actually kind of done it by geo. So like I said, we're in 80 different countries. So we look at our business not only at an aggregate level but by area of the country. And this allows us to show, for example, what regions were having high adoption and low adoption. And if you look at the blue, this was one of our regions that when I started was at 50%. And they were making a lot of noise saying that one of the biggest impediments to their velocity of growth was that they had to negotiate an MSA almost every time. Well, first of all, the first thing we did was look at the data, and the data showed us it wasn't almost all of the time, despite the perception of the sales organization. It was under 50% of the time, which was still too much, but we had a good base to build from. So then we went about, again, improving our online MSA and doing all the things to get the salespeople confident that they could advocate to their customers about why they should use it. And by the second quarter of 2024, we literally had a quarter in which 100% of our new logos in that geo adopted the online MSA. So we have made believers out of that team. They are now 100% behind this and zealous advocates of our online MSA, whereas before they had a high level of skepticism. And it was the metrics that allowed us to prove success here. So metrics can be very powerful in winning over your internal skeptics and getting people to really believe in what's happening. Because it's not just your word for it. Like I think in your initial slide, you're like, get away from I feel like and get towards, hey, the numbers show.
That's right. That's right. And you could tell even with the I feel that wasn't as bad as they said that it was going to be, or at least as what their perception was. So, creating that source of truth matters a lot. A quick question was asked about, bringing the cross-functional stakeholders to the table to outline this problem. What was an effective way that you were able to kind of reach across the aisle, if you will, just to have this discussion and ways that you can eventually remediate it?
I think a big part of of our success here was being able to show why this mattered to them. How do you convince sales? How do you convince finance? How do you convince IT? The different stakeholders that getting a higher level of adoption of the online MSA, that it moves the needle. So one of the first things that we did is we looked at the Salesforce data and we looked at the correlation between customers, for example, who negotiated an MSA on customer paper and the ones who adopted the online MSA, and it showed us there was over 100 days difference in the sales cycle time. So when you go to the sales team and you say, whenever you say yes to customer paper, on average, you're adding 100 days till close. Like that was a big wake up call and got everybody's attention really quickly. So you gotta be able to show them why it matters and the level of impact that it's having, so that they know, so this isn't a small problem. This isn't like a pet project for legal. This is something that's really going to help you in your function.
Yeah, great call.
All right, let's move on to the next slide. This is hard for you to see, but I'll explain it. So this gets to compliance metrics, which I also can call risk metrics, which you talked about earlier. We have identified within our team 6 key risks, which is what we call them. What are the issues within our MSAs that most affect the risk of the company? So category 1 key risk is around unlimited liability, for example, where you have no liability cap for certain types of damages. The second one is around when you have data breach super caps. I think the third one was around you had liquidated damages and just, service level credits. And then the fourth was around governing law. The fifth was around security, custom security provisions that are different from our standards. And then the final one was around support terms, where we agreed to custom support terms that make us vary our response times and resolution times. So we wanted to measure, hey, how often are we sticking within our preferred positions? And in these graphs, the gray is it matches OutSystems standard provisions. The blue is we varied from our standard positions, but we stayed within our fallbacks because we have a playbook that has a documented approved fallbacks. And the orange was where we had to escalate an exception. And everything you're seeing here is only within the subset that was negotiated. So this doesn't even include all the ones where they accepted our online MSA. If that were true, these graphs would look even more amazing than they do. But within the roughly 27% that are negotiated, you can still see within the negotiated MSAs, we're doing a good job of limiting our risk as a company, especially like on number 3, number 5, number 6. So this allows us to show that we're being responsible stewards of the company
Mm,
and the risk of the company's, solvency and longevity.
mm-hmm.
Another benefit of these types of metrics, though, like these variability metrics, is they allow us to see emerging trends. So the best example I'll give you is on key risk number 2, which related to data breach supercaps. When we looked at this 2 years ago, it was much more gray. And then over time, it started to become much more negotiated. And we started to see a lot higher of an exception rate here. So then what we did is we said, okay, if customers are asking for this more frequently, we should change our position. We should move towards the customer and come up with a more compromised position out of the gate, even before they ask us for a negotiation. So we changed our positions. And because of that, then we started to see, the numbers kind of come back towards a more compliant position. So this is a way for you in your legal teams to see where you're getting out of sync with
Yeah.
customer expectations, and then where you see that to kind of pivot back to the middle to reduce that
And
level of variability. So this is actually one of my favorite set of metrics, and this comes right out of our LinkSquares dashboard based on information that we record in the global terms at the analyze level.
yeah, that's great, Sean. And I think a couple questions on that would be the first is how did you define these top 6? Some of them seem very, very evident in things that I've seen from other organizations. But was this a cross-functional effort? Was this maybe highlighted by the friction areas that you mentioned on the MSAs that you were seeing? Was it a combination?
It was definitely a cross-functional collaboration. Within legal, we kind of assessed what we thought our top ones were, but then we went out to the other functions, security, finance, sales, product. Those are typically the biggest ones, and asked them like, hey, what are you most worried about? From a risk level for the company. Of course, we ask senior management, make sure we know kind of what's on their radar screen, and these were, this was the consensus. there's one cautionary tale here, which I did want to mention at some point in this presentation, so this is a good place for it, which is that to capture these, this is not captured by AI and is not captured automatically when our documents are ingested and analyzed. So we created what I think is called a user-generated term in our agreement records and analyze for each of these six. So when you go through your analyzed terms, you'll see key risk one, and then there's a drop down to say, is it our standard? Is it a proof fallback, or is it an escalated exception? So there's six of those that the lawyer handling, our contract manager handling the agreement, needs to populate when that agreement gets signed and before it moves into analyze repository. So there is a manual data, order validation step that's required to populate those fields. The good thing is it has to happen because it can't move into the repository until it does. So there's a check to make sure it doesn't get missed. But with metrics, I caution people, be very careful about
Hmm.
how often you rely on manual data to populate your metrics. And if you do rely on manual data, you have to have some kind of process failsafe to make sure it happens. If it relies on the memory of people, your metrics get less and less reliable. But if there's either a system automation or a hard process gate that requires someone to look at it and to confirm X, Y, and Z, generally you can, I think, rely on your metrics and feel like you've got a high level of accuracy. But the more manual steps you put in, obviously it gets less efficient.
Hmm.
So you have to balance the efficiency of capturing the metrics versus the efficacy of having the metrics. So make sure it's an important thing you're measuring before you ask people to enter the data manually.
Yeah. Yeah. And tying that to the reasoning of the use cases that you mentioned brings a good thought process for me about why that would be justified. How about an example of a customer that's maybe starting new, bringing in LinkSquares and inheriting a lot of agreements that they're just learning for the first time what positions were accepted previously and would like to do a project similar to this? It seems like less is more, seems like the right approach, Sean, but is there kind of a good way to recommend they'd get started in some of the historical agreements in LinkSquares from your point of view?
Well, thinking just off the cuff here, as you ingest all of your historical agreements into Analyze, you can choose what smart terms you're choosing to measure, um, and you pick the ones that match what you really want to unearth from those existing contracts. Maybe it's termination for convenience, for example. Maybe you want to know what percentage of my existing contracts have termination for convenience. Well, that's a smart term. So you can then run a report to say, what percentage have this term or don't have that term, and then you start to get a sense of your variability.
Hmm.
If there's no smart term for it, maybe something very unique to your business, then you could decide to create a user-generated term and do a one-time research project to go through and those legacy contracts and populate the ones that have it, or you could add tags that say, tag those agreements. And there are like, if I've been able sometimes, because we have thousands of contracts in our repository, and so on a couple occasions when I had to do this retroactively, I was able to use some fine-tuned searches and then do some bulk tag updates from there so that without it being that manual, I could tag in bulk all the contracts that had the combinations of words I was looking for. Or I think there's like a similarity term that allows you to try to find those things efficiently. But there are hacks or tricks that will allow you to find these patterns in your legacy contracts without literally going through one by one by one by one.
Yeah, yeah, that's great. All right.
Let's go on to the next slide because I think this talks about the life cycle of the metrics. And metrics are definitely not something that you just do after the fact. So when Nick and I were talking about preparing for this session, he reminded me that one of the best times to get started on your metrics is before your project even starts. Because if you don't know what you're doing now, you're not going to be able to measure whether you were successful later. You need the before to be able to compare to the after. So, if you're thinking about going on some big improvement project or implementing a CLM or doing some big initiative, before you start, measure where you are now, and figure out how you can measure the status quo and document that. Then, once you're done with your initiative, you'll be able to show the improvement. So always get your baseline metrics in place. That really helped OutSystems when we launched because our IT applications team very astutely included in our launch, process the definition of what our key success criteria were going to be. So before we launched, we had to have agreement that this is how we're going to measure success later. So we had to go in and define the metrics we were going to measure 3 months out, and we had to establish some targets that success will look like this if we hit this number in this metric. So I think that was a brilliant call out by that team, and one that kind of really helped us, because then a quarter later, after we had launched, we were able to go back and measure against those key success criteria, and we were able to show that we did it. So for example, one of our key success criteria was that for our MSAs, our master subscription agreements, we wanted to reduce the cycle time within legal by over 30%. And when we went and measured it a quarter later, after the first quarter of implementation, we were at 38% time reduction, which the team in the field was thrilled about. So identifying them in advance and then being able to go back and show later whether you met it, I think is extremely important.
Yeah.
Also, as you go on, and this gets to next kickoff here, you're going to have to continue to justify your ROI. Not only might you need it up front to be able to procure budget in the first place, but as each renewal comes up, or if competing projects come up that want to steal your budget, you need to be able to show that you're getting high ROI. And really, without metrics, it's going to be very, very difficult for you to do that. So I publish my metrics every quarter, so that I can always show at any given time the ROI that we're realizing for the company. And our ROI is a mix of speed to revenue, so reducing the number of days it takes to negotiate an agreement and get it to signature. That's one of the kind of key elements of the ROI. Another is the percentage of adoption of the online MSA, because then we get faster adoption of new customers and new logos, and we contribute that to how that impacts ARR. And then, a third one is around, the compliance with and reduced risk. So those are kind of the three areas where we're really focused on showing how we're building ROI for the business.
Yeah, Sean, and in that regard, just two quick things. The first is in regards to baseline versus key success criteria pre-launch, just from my perspective, if I may chime in, I think one of the challenges or circumstances I think a lot of legal professionals work with, particularly in the CLM, is just getting that cross-functional adoption across the other line of businesses. And being able to showcase some quick value wins, not only does it translate to good outcomes for those lines of businesses, but greatly increases your chances of those individuals getting with the program, following and adopting that policy to heart, not going around the process because they're seeing the direct value that it's bringing to their business and to them personally. A quick question in regards to some of the post-launch metrics that you do share internally. What's your method of sharing those types of metrics across your business today?
What I've been doing right now that's a little bit low tech, I'm hoping to improve it, is I do an email to all the key stakeholders every quarter. And I put in, we have graphs and we have dashboards. And so, but I take screenshots of the relevant graphs and I put it in an email, and then I put a little narrative, under each graph to really just add color as to what's happening. But usually the graph will show you what's happening, but then why? Why is it happening? Like, what are the causes of that? So I can use just a little paragraph under each graph, with clear subheadings so that it's not this giant block of text. That's how I'm doing it now. So it's a combination of I have the dashboards, the graphs are there if anybody wants to go look at them, but then I synthesize it for the teams in kind of a you know an organized email with both the graph and then the explanation of what's happening in the graph.
It's great. And to that vein, Sean, how do you gather feedback on the effectiveness of these metrics from your team as you're passing these out or maybe on your day-to-day conversations?
I would say that the feedback comes, it kind of comes sporadically, but um, there's no greater feeling than when I hear our general counsel come back from a leadership, meeting and report back that, they were going through the metrics of all the functions, and then the management team singled out legal as one of the having one of the clearest set of metrics, among all of the functions. It's probably
Hmm.
very few legal teams that can say that they have some of the best metrics in the company. That's typically marketing and sales and those types of groups. So, it's really raised our stature within the company and our reputation within the leadership team. That we're that data driven. Sometimes people think lawyers are very qualitative, not quantitative. But if you have good systems, I think you can change that perception. And we've gotten, I think, developed a reputation of being very data driven, very transparent, and very much focused on running the legal team in an efficient manner. And the metrics have a huge, huge reason for that.
Yeah. Now, some metrics, I think, in some of the ones that you mentioned, for example, the volume and collaboration and turnaround time, these are really helpful metrics, but they also have a lot of different impacts. For example, I've heard many of our customers say, well, I've done everything I can. It's with the counterparty, as an example, and that's taking a bottleneck. Or there's an individual on the compliance team that's taking a long time to do their reviews. How are you able to isolate those things and recognize, the metrics that matter for your business and your report, but then also call out in a respectful manner some of the other challenges that the business needs to realize?
Well, if you're blessed to have a good CLM, you should be able to isolate those situations. So we measure, for example, how many approval tasks are we generating on average, like for every MSA. But not only that, we know by department, like how many of them go to finance, how many of them go to security, and we can isolate the response time for each one of those groups and show that it's twice as long for function X as it is as function Y. And ideally, you don't broadcast it out to everybody to make that slower function look bad. You reach out to them one on one and say, hey, the metrics are showing us that the approval time is much slower for your function than it is for the others. How can we fix that? And you just
Yeah.
collaborate with that function, and then it comes back down and gets better. So, ideally, you can use it in a way where you know, reach out as a partner to get them bought in to being part of the solution.
Yeah. Makes a lot of sense. And I interrupted you. I don't know if we got to the last piece of this slide here, which is the ROI for budget decisions.
We did because I talked about the renewal and
Okay.
how kind of critical it is to make sure
Ah,
you still have our. I did want to emphasize one last point before
please.
we run out of time, which is that metrics can be a mixed blessing. And I would encourage people to choose your metrics wisely. If you've ever seen the movie Office Space and you remember the reactions that on people's faces when he goes around asking for his TPS reports, you don't want to be that guy. You don't want to be kind of have all these metrics but have everybody roll their eyes and feel like they're worthless, or they don't tell you anything, or they're just busy work.
Mm.
So pick the metrics that really matter. Pick the metrics that can be automated to the greatest extent possible, so you're not putting a lot of manual work on the people on your team or other teams, and keep it to a fairly small list.
Yeah.
If your metrics start to creep and you're tracking a lot of metrics, I think you're going to get a lot of over time institutional resistance,
Hmm.
and that lowers adoption. So
Yeah.
just be smart and pick the ones that matter.
Agree completely. And that brings me into another component that we're offering today is theme dashboards in our dashboards opportunities, which is allowing you to see based on some of the critical things that you care about, being able to visualize those within the dashboard through some criteria that you might be already capturing in part of your process and your due diligence process. So being able to look at things through a legal lens in terms of metrics tailored for your work, what deals are out there in terms of accelerating those, specific agreement deal insights that might be important for you, maybe department agreement insights that are important for other cross-department collaboration work, and then compliance that we kind of showed a kind of sample of that Sam had, that Sean had in a similar vein. So if you're interested, we'd be happy to showcase the theme dashboards to you. And again, we're running out of time here, but we appreciate everybody's attendance here on today's session. And thank you so much, Sean, for giving us this hour of your time. Extremely insightful. I learn something new every time that you present. So thank you very much. And we really appreciate it.
That was a pleasure.
Great. I think at this point, we'll be concluding this portion of the webinar and then stay tuned for the next session. Thank you everyone for joining.
Bye, everyone.